Florida's capital is a very busy place in this final week of the legislative session. There are several pending items that could make an impact on you in our area. Bills about advanced placement classes in school, neighborhood improvements, and how universities select their leaders. Plus, the University of Florida's expansion into Jacksonville. There's back and forth about the land for the graduate campus downtown. And Florida's Marco Rubio now talking about taking the State Department in a new direction. We're going to look at those topics with an expert on state, local, and federal government, Chris Ham. That's ahead on This Week in Jacksonville. And thank you for being with us today. Yeah, so much going on in state and local and national politics, and Chris Ham joins us as we look at those things today. Chris, Florida's legislative session scheduled to end coming up end of the week. It is May 2nd, and we know that there's one imperative. There must be a budget, and then there could be some new laws headed to the governor's desk.
Well, Grant, increasing signs are that the legislature's not going to finish its work on May the 2nd. The House and the Senate have had some challenges getting on the same page in terms of their different appropriations bills. Of course, if they don't finish the budget and the other legislative activities they have to finish by May the 2nd, they could either have an extended session or they may have to come back for special sessions. The ultimate deadline for the state budget, as you know, is June 30th, because that's the end of the state's fiscal year. They have to have a new budget in place by then, so the next fiscal year can start on July the 1.
So. Well, and you could point this out too, but there's got to be a cooling off period. The chambers have to agree and then say, okay, let's sit on this. Is it 72 hours, 48 hours?
That's correct, Kent. Yeah, it's about 3 days. And again, if you don't have that, the timing, it all sort of kind of moves forward a little bit. So if you don't meet those earlier deadlines, the chances of finishing on time and having that handkerchief drop at what they call sine die on the last day of the session become increasingly less likely. I was actually in Tallahassee this past week, and the sense I got from a number of people involved in the process, Kent, was that May 2nd was going to be an increasingly unlikely date for the legislature to finish. They may have to come back in special sessions or extend the dates of the current session.
Chris, from your experience and what we've observed, it's not unusual that the House and the Senate may have different priorities or different ideas on how to get those priorities achieved.
No, that's in fact how the process is supposed to work, Kent. I mean, obviously, particularly as that comes with the budget, the governor presents a budget to the legislature for its consideration. Both the House and the Senate have their own versions of the budget that they go through, and then they kind of come together and try to collaborate and resolve their differences, conference, and then see if they can come up with a unified budget. Sometimes that's easier than others. And I'll tell you, Kent, it gets increasingly harder as, if you're a state and local government, you're beginning to have some revenue challenges or challenges in balancing the budget. We're not quite there yet in Florida, but definitely not as necessarily as strong a budget as it has been in recent years, just from a revenue standpoint. That can sometimes complicate this process. Also complicating the process are issues that are budget related, but not necessarily specific to the budget. For example, the governor has a series of proposals to reduce property taxes. The State House Speaker, Danny Perez, has said, I'm much more interested in reducing sales taxes. The Senate's tried to take sort of a middle ground between the two. So it's not always just the budget you have to resolve. You certainly have to resolve that. As you say, it is a constitutional obligation of the legislature, but there's also a lot of related issues that go into that as well. Resolving all of those and getting that done in a 60-day period of time is often very difficult, and it looks like probably insurmountable in 2025.
It seemed to me at the time, this is really unusually contentious, but you've pointed out that this happens in state government from time to time. Governor DeSantis entering, the end of his second term, really, and when he put forth a budget proposal, lawmakers at the state level said, yeah, we'll do the budget. I mean, this is part of the reason that they're having trouble getting to that finishing point, right?
Well, I think that's exactly right. Look, but it is more the norm than the exception for the executive branch and the legislative branch to have different and very strong feelings about what a budget should look like. What's been unusual is for the last 6 years, the first 6 years of Ron DeSantis' governorship, generally there was alignment, or the governor was able to get most of his priorities achieved in session. Now that he's toward the end of his term, he went through an unsuccessful presidential campaign against another candidate from Florida who was successful. And so for a variety of reasons, the legislature in these last few months has sort of readopted its protection of its institutional prerogatives, asserting itself as a co-equal branch of government. Again, this has happened in governorship after governorship. My old boss and mentor, Bob Graham, used to talk about how some of his biggest challenges were the Democrats who controlled the legislature during the 1980s and, having to navigate that process.
Yeah.
This is no different than that. What's really been the exception is not what's happening now, but what happened sort of the 6 years before now. But it is a sea change during the DeSantis administration, and everyone's having to adjust to that, where the State House Speaker and to a lesser extent the Senate President are saying, Governor, thank you, but we're going to assert our own institutional priorities.
And some of the thank you or no thank you is being communicated in public venues, and it doesn't sound very polite.
Not always that politely, no, right.
So wanted to talk through some of the issues, the bills that are out there, and we'll talk a couple now and maybe in the next segment talk. But one of the things that we followed this year after controversy in 2024 is a bill to prevent golf courses, luxury resorts, that kind of thing in Florida state parks. And as of our interview today, it was headed toward the Senate, right?
That's right. And that bill looks like it is going to be probably successful in this session. Now, we don't know yet what the governor might do to that bill when it arrives at his desk. He has issued a variety of veto threats on different pieces of legislation already, so that's unclear. But as viewers will remember, Kent, last year it came out that the Florida Parks Department was considering a proposal that would allow golf courses and hotel rooms and some other amenity pickleball courts on state parks. That received a huge pushback from the general public.
Not a fan favorite.
Well, that's right. And members of the legislature, all of them had the position that, like, hang on, these parks are supposed to protect our natural treasures. They're not for, housing or accommodations or recreation. Yeah. And so Senator Gail Harrell put forward a bill this session that would prohibit that. There have been some efforts to amend that bill that have been unsuccessful in the Senate. It's going through the Senate right now, but it looks like that bill is headed for passage. We'll have to see how the governor ultimately decides to treat that if it does reach his desk.
Yeah, there's another one you pointed out, and I think this is interesting, about community redevelopment areas. And so we got an example, St. John's, also Duval County. What's going on with this potential legislation?
Well, Ken, there's been a variety of media outlets that report about this. Jacksonville Today here in our viewing areas talked about this some. But Ken, a variety of communities across Florida, cities and counties, are able to, under Florida law right now, create what are called community redevelopment areas. And these are ways to generate some extra revenue, some extra investment in areas that are dealing with blight or infrastructure challenges, to be able to put more money in those areas. And the way it works is a government declares a community redevelopment area. We have 7 here in Jacksonville. There are 3 in St. Augustine, but you find them in every part of the state. And what happens is when a CRA is declared, Kent, at that point, the property taxes collected are capped for that area. That's all that goes to the local government going forward, that capped amount. And that increment, this is called tax increment financing, that extra amount stays in the community redevelopment area to invest in infrastructure or in blight or a variety of other factors like that. There are 2 bills now pending before the legislature that would essentially do away with these community redevelopment areas. One would say you can't even make any additional investments after October 1st of this year. Another one would take a much more graduated or sort of, methodical approach. But this is a matter of great concern to cities and counties across the state, because CRAs have been for them an essential tool to be able to focus resources on neighborhoods that really can use some extra help in dealing with these issues. And again, here in this area, we've got one in Arlington called Renew Arlington. We've got 3 in downtown Jacksonville. There's 2 in Jacksonville Beach. In St. Augustine, there's 3, including one in the West Augustine area that just started in the last several months. So a matter of concern. We don't know yet whether these bills are going to be successful or not this year, but it is something that city and county governments are keeping a very close eye on.
And we're keeping a close eye on a couple of different things happening at the state level. We're going to talk about those. Also going to talk about a couple of big issues locally when we come back. One, if the proposed land swap to provide a space for the UF Graduate School campus, if it should be swapped, purchased, whatever. Another, funding cuts to advanced placement classes in schools across the state. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
And once a month, Chris Hand is with us. Chris served as chief of staff in the city of Jacksonville when Alvin Brown was mayor. He knows city politics inside and out, that experience. I want to lean on that. How do we interpret this battle that we're seeing about land for the new University of Florida graduate campus? We know where they want to be, but now there's some contention about, but they want that building, and how do they get it?
Well, Kent, that has been a matter, just the latest matter of debate between the mayor's office and the city council. Obviously, right now we know the University of Florida is opening a satellite campus over in the La Villa section of town. One of the pieces of property they want for that graduate campus is what's known as the Interline
Yeah, we're
building.
showing you some video here, just exteriors of
Exactly,
it. But
right on Bay Street in kind of the La Villa area of downtown. The question is, how does the University of Florida get that property? There's a couple of options. What the mayor's office has proposed and has been discussing is the idea of a land swap. Gateway Jacks, which is a developer which is planning to do some work in West Downtown right now, is interested and currently owns that property, is interested in giving that property to the city in exchange for a couple of pieces of very valuable riverfront property where the Jacksonville Landing used to be located, so they can develop that, build a residential tower, and do some other developments there as well. That would be a land swap. But some on City Council have expressed concern, Kent, about this, wondering if that's a fair deal for the city. Does this building, these two very valuable pieces of riverfront property, and also expressing, shouldn't we do some sort of procurement or RFP?
Well, and it's a reasonable question from City Council perspective. Sure. Hey, let's make sure this is a good deal for the city. That's what their job should be, right?
Right. I mean, that's exactly part of the oversight role. And I think fair to ask, shouldn't this be done via procurement process, that we can see if there's anyone else out there who wants to bid on this particular property. So what City Council has proposed is something different. Rather than doing a land swap, having the city just buy the property from Gateway Jacks, this La Villa property for the University of Florida campus, and then work to provide that for the use of the University of Florida, and then do a separate process on the riverfront parcels, see who else out there wants to potentially bid on it, what ideas people may bring to the table. So that's the debate right now. The mayor's office has proposed this land swap. It would require city council approval to do that because it's disposing of city property. Council has already passed a plan and set aside money that would instead buy that building from the developer. So we'll have to see, who prevails when it ultimately comes to city council.
Yeah, I want to talk about another issue that really affects local people and is on a state level also. And this is the idea of Florida lawmakers basically saying that they're going to change the funding for advanced placement or advanced programs for students, including dual enrollment, AP courses, ACE programs, IB, this sort of thing. And one of the things I knew we wanted to talk about is we're seeing those students come out and raise their voice. And it's encouraging in some ways. This is the city of Jacksonville because at City Council this week, some students came forward and a public comment, very upset that there was a vote before they got to speak. Walk us through some of this, Chris.
Well, the overall issue, Ken, and WJXT covered this issue at the council meeting very thoroughly. But the main issue is, right now, programs like Advanced Placement, AB, International Baccalaureate, IB, the ACE program, and dual enrollment, these are gateways to higher education for high school students. I mean, they're crucially important, not only because they help prepare high school students for college, but in many cases, give them the opportunity to earn credits and help them qualify for college and help them pay for college. College, as we both know as people who have been involved in that process as parents, it is not inexpensive. And to be able to
what a tactful way to put that.
Yeah, right. To be able to give kids not just a chance to kind of, have academic rigor in their schedules, Kent, so they can be competitive for college, but also give them ways to help pay for the cost of college. These are crucially important programs. I think that is why there has been such a loud and stunned and upset reaction from teachers and parents and principals and school administrators and others at the idea that the legislature might cut this funding. The way funding works for these programs right now, Kent, is schools are paid for success. This is not just a handout that they get no matter how their students do. Right now, schools receive a certain payment for students succeeding on advanced placement exams, IB exams, ACE exams, successfully completing dual enrollment courses. So this is money the schools get directly from the legislature in the event students are successful on these programs. Much to many people's surprise, there was, bills that were introduced in this session that would cut in half those payments made to schools for successful AP exams. If you take an AP exam and it's scored on a scale of 1 to 5 and you receive a 1 or a 2, you don't pass, the school's not paid money. But if they receive a 3, 4, or 5 for a student, they do receive some money. Well, the legislature is proposing to cut that in half. This has been a matter of great concern among principals who have to manage school budgets, school administrators, superintendents, and school boards around the state. And as you showed on the screen, students, many of whom showed up at the Jacksonville City Council meeting last week, urging them to pass a resolution. And, you know, look, councils are going to view different ways have different opinions on resolutions, make different decisions. But I think the real controversy of this meeting was the fact that students showed up, exercised their key effective citizenship skills to show up, make their voices heard, and didn't get a chance to do that. That the city council voted on this resolution before giving those students a chance to speak. I think the concern was these are people we're trying to encourage to be future leaders, involved in our community, to make their voices heard over time, and were denied the right to speak. There's been a lot of controversy about that, as Channel 4 covered.
And City Councilman Matt Carlucci, very upset as we visited with him. He said, I left the meeting. I've never done that, but I'm so upset that the public, young people in this case, didn't get a chance to weigh in on this. We're going to weigh in on some more topics in just a little bit. Chris worked for U.S. Senator Bob Graham, so still ahead. We're diving into his view of some of the key federal topics when we come back, like Marco Rubio's move to reorganize the State Department. Stay with us.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
Government law attorney Chris Hand with us today, and we want to talk about some federal issues, and in some ways both of these relate to the DOGE effort in Washington, D.C. One of those that we wanted to discuss is Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the former U.S. Senator from Florida. He's talked about some really big reorganization with the State Department.
Again, one of the things we've seen in the now kind of just over 90 days that President Trump has been back in the White House is a concerted effort to significantly reduce the size and scope and function of a number of federal agencies. One U.S. government department that had not yet been touched was the U.S. State Department, which former Florida Senator Marco Rubio is, of course, the head of that department as the Secretary of State. Just last week, he announced a pretty significant reorganization plan. State Department had somewhere in the neighborhood of about 730 bureaus around the world. This would reduce that down to about 600, would also kind of reorganize some offices, moves kind of the remnants of the U.S. Agency for International Development into the State Department in a new sort of humanitarian bureau. So a significant downsizing of the department. Now, it's not clear yet how many employees might ultimately sort of not be employed there, but it is kind of part and parcel of what has been an overall effort by the Trump administration to downsize the federal government. Now, one that is not without controversy, obviously, in some of the ways they've gone about that in terms of employee layoffs, employees having to send in emails about saying the 5 things they did that week, and controversy in terms of what are the impacts of all of this on services. Immediately, Secretary Rubio's plan, which was not nearly as dramatic as some thought it would be, and there'd been a leaked version of the plan draft. This was not that, but immediately some concern about, does this just signal the United States is pulling back from some of its involvements around the world, particularly in areas like humanitarian aid and justice and some other areas as well? So again, seeing some pushback to the plan, but right now that's all of it is, a plan. It would ultimately have to go through multiple levels of approval, but it was announced this past week.
Well, one of the things that didn't seem to need much approval except from the incoming president was the establishment of the Department of Government Efficiency and having Elon Musk be the leader of that. We're understanding that Mr. Musk says he's going to step back from DOGE and focus on Tesla because the earnings plunged in the company. We've got a couple more minutes so we can talk about that.
Well, I mean, Ken, I think that's exactly right. His time in the federal government is coming to an end no later than the month of May. He was a special government employee, so had a limited amount of time in any event. But obviously the DOGE effort's been met with some controversy. As we've talked about on a previous show, I know something about this because sort of government efficiency is something I do partially for a living. This was really not as much of an efficiency effort as it was an elimination effort, just making dramatic changes, downsizing federal agencies, removing functions that they had. There has been controversy about that. Number one, people being concerned about services and how they'll be affected. And two, whether it was even legal, given that Congress ultimately has the power of authorization and appropriation. But gotten to the point now, and there's been news reports, Washington Post, other outlets, that Mr. Musk had had some conflicts with other members of the Trump administration, cabinet secretaries, others. His popularity ratings have dropped precipitously, and as you say, it does seem to have had some impact on Tesla and its earnings. So he's now going to step away from the federal government. We don't know whether DOGE will continue.
That's in something we'll all be watching.
Yeah, in any shape or form, but if it does continue, it will be without Elon Musk.
Yeah, something that we're definitely watching there. We're about out of time, but one of the things that you had pointed out, Florida lawmakers could pass a bill that's going to change how universities select leaders, and I think this goes to former Senator Ben Sasse being selected at the University of Florida, where he was the only finalist.
Well, but Ken, it used to be that all of these searches were transparent. People could see who the candidates were at any phase in the process. The legislature changed that in 2022 and made it so that only the names of finalists were public, and in the case of Ben Sasse, University of Florida, he was the only finalist. There's now a move by the legislature to dial that back, to restore the law to what it was before, make those searches transparent again. That's in a bill with some other state Board of Education regulations. The governor has suggested that he is likely to veto that bill if it passes the legislature. So that'll be part of the legislative endgame we're tracking here over the next few weeks.
Which may be the end of this week and may be beyond that. Chris Hand, thanks so much for your time today. And I'm Kent Justice. Thanks for watching on air on Channel 4 and the CW17 and online, news4jax.com, or streaming on News4Jax Plus. And don't forget to check out This Week in Jacksonville Business Edition. This episode of our podcast, we're speaking with Jack Hanania. He's a legendary entrepreneur in the auto dealer industry. You can find new episodes every Thursday at 9 a.m. You're going to be able to find it right now on News4Jax Plus under the channel This Week in Jacksonville. Thanks for joining us today.
See why every day more people are choosing News4Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.